Welcome to this webinar. What does construction need to deliver the residential retrofit needed for net zero? I'm Thomas Lane, the technical editor of Building Magazine. The government has committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050, but to achieve this, we need to decarbonise our homes and buildings. Some 17% of the UK's emissions come from buildings, with 77% of those emissions coming from homes, and most of that is space heating and hot water provision. The UK replaces about 1% of its building stock each year, so the only way to really meaningfully reduce carbon emissions from homes is to improve the energy performance of those homes. Now, according to the Climate Change Committee, this is going to cost some £250 billion to achieve, and the construction industry is going to be responsible for delivering the improvements needed to reduce emissions on the ground. So, to discuss how the industry is going to meet that challenge, I'm joined by three speakers. Firstly, Brian Berry, Chief Executive of the Federation of Master Builders, Emma Link, Industry Analyst from the Construction Industry Training Board, and Russell Smith, the Managing Director of Priority Projects. So in terms of running order, Brian is going to speak first about the challenge and how the Construction Leadership Council's National Retrofit Strategy, I'd like to point out that the Federation of Master Builders did write a section on domestic retrofit, can actually help meet this challenge. Emma's going to talk about the research that she's done into skills, how do we actually upskill the industry to do all this work. And Russell's also going to talk about that, but I believe from probably a more practical perspective, because Priority Projects actually advise social housing providers on how they can carry out retrofit at scale. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Brian, but just before I do that, I just want to say there will be time after the presentations to answer your questions. So if you've got any questions, you can submit them during the presentations or wait to the end, but we will be having some Q&A at the end. So but before that, presentation time. So thanks very much to Brian. I'm handing over to you now.
Thomas, thanks very much for that introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to be here this morning to talk about retrofit. I have spoken in previous months about retrofit, and in some ways, unfortunately, things haven't moved on as quickly as I would have hoped, but I'm really delighted that Russell and Emma are here to join me, because actually we've all been working very closely on what I just want to recap on, which is the need for a national retrofit strategy. So if we go to the next slide. So just reminding ourselves about why this is important, and really it stems from the fact that the UK government has a legal obligation to deliver net zero by 2050. So that's driving, I think, this whole approach towards a low carbon built environment. And the Prime Minister towards the end of last year talked about a green industrial revolution with the government's 10-point plan. And that's very important, because our homes contribute 35% of energy in the UK, and in particular they emit 20% of carbon emissions. So we're not going to be able to deliver zero carbon by 2050 unless actually we tackle our existing building stock. Next. And that's important because in this country we do have a very rich and varied housing stock, an estimated 29 million homes, but the challenge of our building stock is that it's very leaky and energy inefficient, and this has social consequences for people living in those homes. We know that 2.5 million households live in fuel poverty, and 2 years ago there were 10,000 deaths attributed to living in cold homes. So there is a social imperative actually to actually making our homes fit for purpose. But I think the challenge is that 85% of our homes will still be in use in 2050. So we can't rely on just building zero carbon homes. We've actually got to tackle our existing building stock. Next, please. So what's holding us back? Why aren't we getting on with it? Well, we need to look at it both from the consumer's point of view and industry. So if you're a consumer, there is really a lack of clear and accurate information that you can easily access. And if you are if you have found the information, who's going to do the work? Because we know that consumers are very concerned about cowboy builders and any redress if things go wrong. And on top of that, there are very few financial incentives to encourage householders to invest. Nationwide did a survey just a few weeks ago and reported that an energy efficient home only attracted an extra 2% in capital value. So it's not financially very attractive at the moment for consumers to actually retrofit their homes, which probably explains why that only 10% of households undertake standalone energy efficiency works. So that's from the consumer side, but from the industry point of view, unfortunately, we are quite a fragmented industry, and there is a skills gap in the building industry in terms of having people with the right experience and qualifications to retrofit the building stock. And you can see there that 89% of contractors don't hold formal qualifications for pre-1919 work. So lack of demand and then a fragmented supply means that actually we have got a problem. Next. So we do need market intervention if we're going to actually improve our homes. And we have over recent years seen the arrival and demise of the Green Deal under the coalition government. And last year we saw the introduction of the Green Homes Grant Scheme. Both those initiatives came and went. And of course, the danger of these financial measures is that it creates uncertainty in the building industry. Companies that are thinking of investing suddenly realize actually the government's pulling the rug from under them. So that creates a lot of uncertainty in the building industry and a lack of investment. So a successful retrofit scheme must be long-term, and it should have builders at the very heart of the retrofit plan to actually enable it to happen. Next. So that's where the F&B, working closely with the Construction Leadership Council, has been working to develop a national retrofit strategy. And that's why I'm delighted Russell's here, because he's been really the driver in putting this together in developing a plan for the next 20 years. And we try to be very focused, actually. We're very much aware of the political realities. So we wanted to be able to demonstrate to the government what value it would bring within the next 4 years. But within the first, within the 20-year period, there would be 4 phases. The first phase would be a slower startup because we need to build up capacity in the supply chain. The second phase would be a faster period where we would be ramping up the delivery. Phase 3 would be the maximum period, and then phase 4 would be tackling those very difficult to treat properties, the solid brick houses, which obviously are more expensive and more challenging to upgrade. Next. So if we had a national retrofit strategy, what would the benefits be? Well, we've worked out that the benefits over the next 4 years would be the creation of 100,000 new jobs in the building sector. And this would be at a cost of 5.3 billion. So this would actually be a stimulus to help create the retrofit market. But in addition to that, there would be a serious saving to the NHS of 1.4 billion pounds. And given the stress and strains that the NHS is under, that saving, I think, is very considerable. There would also be, over a period of time, substantial savings in energy bills, which, again, very timely given what's happening to our energy supplies at the moment. And of course, there would be carbon savings. So these are clear, defined benefits that a national retrofit strategy could bring if the government actually was to actually set out a clear programme over the coming weeks. So I just want to explain very briefly on the next slide about some of the components of the National Retrofit Strategy. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that we've identified 8 interlocking deliverables. And I think I was at the party conferences, going to various fringe meetings, both at Labour and Conservatives. You hear a lot about retrofit and you hear lots about the skills or the demand. But the key thing about the retrofit strategy is actually you need to look at all these elements together. You need a helicopter view, because one bit of it won't solve the problem. The Green Homes Grant Scheme is an example of that, where the government actually provided financial incentives, but actually failed to actually think about how would the industry deliver. We need to get the two running in parallel. So what we've said is actually each home needs to have a passport, so that actually owner occupiers can determine what can be done to their homes over a period of time. There needs to be skills training modules. We need to develop the skills and qualifications to upskill and the building industry. We've also said actually that the strategy should be linking into various initiatives happening all across the country. We know that local authorities are doing some great examples of retrofitting, Manchester being one very good example, but the Welsh Government's also taking a strong lead. So these local initiatives need to be brought into the retrofit strategy. And then, of course, you need to actually have financial incentives. So there should be discussion about stamp duty rebates or a cut in VAT, and the introduction of grants at the beginning to actually kickstart the retrofit market. If we go on to the next slide. Number 5, we obviously need to think about training and accreditation to make sure that those carrying out the work are experienced and qualified to do so. And number 6 is about materials and equipment, which is obviously has become even more important. If we're going to develop the supply chain, we need to make sure there is an adequate supply of materials to actually underpin the market. Consumer demand I talked about earlier, so it's really important that homeowners have the information that they need. And then lastly, there needs to be a compliance and quality regime to make sure that the reputation of the retrofit work isn't undermined by any cowboy builders or consumers losing confidence in the work that's being carried out. So if we just go into the next slide, you can see that we are building up a lot of support ahead of the COP26. Over 50 organisations now have signed up to the National Retrofit Strategy. And then if we go on to the next slide, in terms of next steps, we know that the government is interested in the National Retrofit Strategy, but to date there's been no formal recognition. We are, of course, all waiting for the heat and building strategy, which has been going on all year. This, I think, will be absolutely essential to determine how far the government has taken on board the recommendations of the retrofit strategy. Hopefully, it will be published ahead of the spending review, which is later this month. And obviously, we very much hope that it will be ready ahead of the COP conference in Glasgow in November. It seems to me a great opportunity for this government, which wanting to show the world in Glasgow that we are taking a lead, that if there was a comprehensive national retrofit strategy, we could be showing world leadership in actually tackling our existing building stock and sharing that best practice worldwide. So we'll have to wait and see, I guess, when we finally see the publication of the heat and building strategy. So I think that concludes my short presentation, but I know we'll be taking questions later. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Brian. It was really interesting. So before we move on to Emma, I've got a couple of questions for you. So, I mean, you obviously prepared this strategy. You sort of alluded to the government have acknowledged it. But I mean, are you having any sort of conversations on a day-to-day basis of any government departments about this at all? And do you think it's feeding into the heat and building strategy at all?
Yes. So we've had several meetings with various government departments, MHCLG, we've had meetings with the Cabinet Office, we've met with the Treasury. We are putting forward the case very strongly. I am encouraged actually at party conferences that there was a lot of fringe meetings talking about retrofit. So I think ministers and cannot escape the fact that actually this is a very important issue, that there's clear public demand for actually tackling this. What concerns me is, will they adopt the holistic approach, and will they actually consider those 8 key deliverables that I've mentioned? Because past performance hasn't been very encouraging. But let's wait and see. The mood music seems to be positive. I'm trying to be optimistic about the heating building strategy, but the devil's in the detail. So it's easy for politicians to talk about, yes, of course, this is very important. We need to tackle climate change. We are looking at energy efficiency. We're going to provide grants, but where is the detail? And that will be crucial.
Absolutely. And I got another question, which I think you touched on your presentation. I mean, we've seen the failure of the Green Deal and also the recent sort of fiasco, really, I think, if I were to describe it, over the Green Homes grant. I mean, it must have knocked confidence of your members. I mean, do you think your members are going to really sort of be engaging in any new sort of policies that come out of government after these 2 hits they've taken?
Well, the Green Homes grant scheme was disappointing, to give it an understatement, because we had to promote the scheme to our members. We provided an access for them to become PAS 2030 accredited. Only a few of my members took up the offer, but those who did lost quite a lot of money for small companies, and that undermines the confidence in the building industry to invest in the future. So this time the government has really got to get it right, because otherwise I think builders will say, what is the point? We've got huge demand in RMI, there's a shortage of builders, we don't need all this, we're just going to do what we do, and there won't be that take up, which is completely wrong, of course, because we do need to actually make our homes greener and more energy efficient. So it really is beholden on the government to show leadership, real leadership, and understand the scale of the problem. I think it's a national infrastructure project, to be honest. It should be on that scale. It's going to take decades, and we need to start it now. We cannot afford to wait any longer if we are going to upgrade our existing homes. And the only way to do that, of course, is to have some form of agency or department, someone coordinating all of this to make sure it will happen. Otherwise, I can see it going off in different directions, and that's not what we need.
Sure. Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks very much indeed, Brian. Now going to move on to our next presenter, Emma Link from the Chartered, the Construction Industry Training Board. So, Emma, over to you. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. I'll just see. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's all there. Can you see
the screen? Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you very much, and thank you, Brian. So Brian's done a really good job there of setting the scene for me. I'm going to focus a bit more on the barriers, the need for a coordinated approach, and incentives for businesses. So earlier this year, we published our Building Skills for Net Zero research, which we highlighted the huge amount of work that will be required to reach the government's net zero target by 2050. In particular, it identified the huge challenge, but also the opportunity of retrofitting approximately 29 million buildings that will be required in order to meet the target. A further small piece of research I've been undertaking, working with the Construction Leadership Council's Repair, Maintenance and Improvement Group to specifically examine the skills required to support the National Retrofit Strategy, and also considering what support SMEs might require. And I'm going to be sharing some insight from both of those pieces of research with you today. So to put this in context, our latest Construction Skills Network forecast forecasts that there's a need to recruit an extra 217,000 workers between now and 2025. In addition to this, our Building Skills for Net Zero research forecast an additional 350,000 workers will be needed by 2028 to deliver net zero, including the massive programme of retrofit work that needs to be undertaken. These are very large numbers, especially when the industry is already reporting that it's finding it challenging to recruit enough people. 95% of the industry is made up of small and micro firms, and self-employment is significantly higher than in other industries. These are the types of firms that tend to struggle to engage with training and skills development due to time and financial pressures. They need certainty and security to enable their businesses to evolve. Currently, there are also multiple other pressures that are making life difficult for an SME in construction. These include material supply and logistics, as well as being able to recruit. They're all antagonistic pressures that make SMEs reluctant to take anything that looks like a risk. So looking at the barriers, the biggest barrier, which Brian has already mentioned and appears at the top of everyone's list, is the lack of demand within the domestic market and the failure of previous government programmes to stimulate this. Businesses in the industry and training providers need sight of a long-term pipeline of work in order to justify the investment of time and money in the skills and training that's needed to undertake this work. Previous government schemes have caused a boom and bust in demand for some of the measures, which has resulted in a loss of workers when schemes or funding have ended. And this boom and bust, or feast and famine, has also made some firms wary of engaging with future schemes, and they see it as being higher risk. Energy efficiency retrofit is complex, and householders also need assistance in understanding the options and which elements are the best for their property. Retrofit essentially can be split into two broad elements. The first being better insulation and improvement of the building fabric. Depending on the property type, this can be particularly disruptive. And secondly, low carbon heating, ventilation and energy systems. And it's the second element that is the biggest expense. Heat pumps, for example, currently cost a lot more than a new gas boiler. Good quality training will be essential in ensuring quality workmanship and correct installation, which will optimise the performance of the systems installed and minimise the performance gap. There is no one solution when it comes to technologies to be deployed. Solutions will vary depending on individual building requirements. For example, solutions may differ for flats and apartments, and for homes that are off the gas grid, as well as those for different building fabric types. We recognise that the majority of firms that will be delivering this programme of work will be SMEs. Therefore, we have carried out a small number of depth interviews with some SMEs regarding energy efficiency retrofit, and there were a number of key concerns expressed by the respondents. Respondents who are already delivering energy efficiency retrofit were positive about the opportunity presented to their businesses, but also highlighted concerns relating to unscrupulous firms previously entering the industry to deliver measures under government schemes who have capitalised on the opportunity but delivered poor quality work, which has negatively impacted on the reputation of the sector. These firms were very keen to maintain the good reputations that they have built up. Feedback from respondents on engaging with government schemes, particularly the Green Homes Grant, found that the processes are too complicated, and several reported having difficulty getting clear answers to questions around accreditation requirements. There was a feeling that the scheme was rolled out too quickly before the supporting processes had been fully developed. However, most said that they would look at future government schemes. Several of the respondents had also experienced skills issues and skills gaps relating to energy efficiency retrofit measures, and this was highlighted as a potential barrier to future growth. Insulation installers and heat pump installers are frequently mentioned in this respect. Some of the other skills gaps highlighted include the need for trades to have an understanding of the building as a system, and existing workers are likely to need training in retrofit, and most qualifications focus on new build. This is also the case in terms of modern methods of construction and traditional buildings. Our researchers found clear consensus and support for a coordinated programme of domestic retrofit supported by a national skills plan or strategy to underpin it and ensure the planned development of skills within the supply chain. This would also facilitate workforce planning and allow for a just transition from declining roles to new or different occupations. For industry, it would also give employers sight of a long-term opportunity presented by retrofit and give them the confidence to invest in the skills and training of their workforce. In terms of training, we need to move to a more planned approach so that training delivery matches the occupations and skills that the industry needs. We also need to move to more of a continuous professional development approach that allows individuals to easily update their skills and knowledge as tools and techniques change. In terms of incentives for business, the industry is clear. The single biggest driver is having a long-term planned pipeline of work to inspire confidence in the industry to invest in the skills and training required. This will drive training demand and uptake. As I've said, many of the firms delivering this work are SMEs, and many of these are already busy and find it difficult to cover the cost of training and the associated cost of the employee having time off-site. Employers also need guidance on what training is available and what is required. Government schemes need to have clearly articulated accreditation and qualification processes, and also clear systems and guidance for firms on the documentation required to facilitate acceptance and payment for work undertaken. In terms of firms that are engaged currently, from the recent interviews that I've conducted with SMEs who are currently engaged in energy efficiency retrofit, some were long-established firms undertaking social housing refurbishment and retrofit projects, some who project manage using specialist contractors, and some others who were very well connected and able to use their contacts and knowledge to obtain and deliver work collaboratively. Thank you.
Great, well, thanks very much indeed, Emma, for that. Again, before we move on to the final presentation, I've just got a couple of questions. I mean, in your research, I mean, is there any particular area of retrofit where there needs to be a real, a particularly big focus on upskilling? I mean, because retrofit covers so much from sort of, you know, loft insulation right through to sort of heat pumps and, you know, quite sophisticated technology. I mean, where do you think the focus needs to be?
I think probably one of the biggest things is that's come up a lot is the need for all trades and installers to have an understanding of the building as a system and how the different elements interact to avoid problems that have been occurred in the past. For example, where schemes for insulation installation have occurred in the when the insulation's been installed, they haven't accounted for ventilation, so then people have experienced problems with damp and condensation. That's something that's often given as an example. So I think one of the first things is really important to give those that are currently in the workforce an understanding of the building as a system to prevent those kind of problems. I think also the other element is increased sort of collaboration. So a need for better collaboration, communication skills and teamwork, working with different trades and different organisations alongside, particularly where you're talking about whole house retrofit, where you may have trades working alongside each other. So I think those are two sort of fundamental skill requirements for those in the existing workforce, as well as applying to obviously those who come into the industry from outside as well.
Great, and did you get a sense from your, because I think you touched on this in your presentation, do you get a sense that what we're going to end up with are firms that just specialise in retrofit as all they do, and then everyone else will just carry on doing what they've done before? Do you think all firms will gradually move to towards doing some retrofit work?
I guess that kind of comes down to the demand, doesn't it, and the certainty of that pipeline of work. I think you know, there are some firms that we've spoken to that are currently focused on delivering whole house retrofit and delivering the range of measures. There are some that we've spoken to that specialise in a particular aspect. I think possibly this sort of it could potentially be a driver for having operatives that are more multi-skilled. So particularly for those firms who were to go in and do a whole house retrofit, it would also help their, you know, I think help their understanding if you've got operatives that are skilled in multiple installations, they have a better understanding perhaps of how those different elements interact. So I think possibly that sort of multi-skilling might be one of the things that it sort of drives forward, particularly in terms of whole house retrofit.
Great, well, thanks very much. So we're now going to move on to our last presenter, that is Russell Smith from Parity Project. So over to you, Russell.
Hi, my screen. Thanks for having me.
Russell, we can
just
see
going to make...
your... That looks good. Your screen is split. We can sort of see your next slide, and if you can just maximize your screen so the one slide shows. That's it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks for having me. I'm going to add some detail to Brian's presentation on the constituent parts of the National Retrofit Strategy. But I also want to then add some practical realities and give some optimism towards the end of the talk, really, about things that are in place and are moving forward, in spite of sort of lack of any kind of leadership from the government. From my perspective, this journey started in 2004, and I renovated my own house. So I'm a civil engineer. I started working in big, heavy construction-based type stuff, and I started to realise that this wasn't something I wanted to focus my life on. I wanted to have an impact, and that the existing housing stock of the UK, particularly at that time, had the biggest share of the carbon emissions, and it's still big, and it's not going anywhere, and it's a really difficult nut to crack. In my view, it's the biggest engineering project the country's ever seen, and we haven't even started it yet. For me, this house and renovating it with my own hands, because I didn't have any money, was an amazing training course, and I understood the issues. And we had 3,000 people come and look at it over the course of 3 years. They were intrigued, they were interested, they wanted to do it to their own home. And I'll comment a bit later on the demand side of it on the market. But the key thing from my perspective is we need to understand, and it plays to Emma's point about sort of homes as a system, really, is that every home is unique. The first house that I did was in Sutton in South London. These are all houses that were all built within a mile of that house that we modelled as part of a lead up to the Green Deal with the Energy Saving Trust and the London Borough of Sutton. And so they're all built within 5 years of each other. They're all around about 1900. They're all the same house type, and the constituent parts of their energy consumption can be seen on that graph on the different pie charts, and the size of the pies relative to the annual bill. And you can see they're all completely individual. If you're to carry out an EPC on these properties, all the automated recommendations that come out of the software would be pretty much identical. So giving advice to these people, encouraging them to invest, looking at what an investment proposition might be for those individual properties would be wrong using an EPC. You need to be able to give them the detail. Suddenly you might catch their attention there by potentially creating demand and doing the right thing and actually seeing return on that investment. So our approach has to be to look at people individually on that basis. And the National Retrofit Programme that I worked on with Brian for the Construction Leadership Council had a number of headlines, some of which Brian has gone into, so I won't dwell too much, but there were some key aspects that were really important. Obviously, Emma's highlighted the training development programme, and we're broadly in agreement on the number of people that need to come into the industry. It's got a lot of noughts at the end, right? This is not something we can hope that will happen by tweaking at the edges of what we currently do. It also impacts every part of the UK, driving local economies. SMEs are the mainstay of our economy, not just in construction, but everywhere. And if what we're doing is stimulating those, they can be renovating the places that they live in. This can be a source of pride. It can be something that can really engage people's imagination. But to make that happen, we felt that there needs to be some kind of central agency, not necessarily something that's led or funded by government necessarily, but that it needs to have an energy and some leadership qualities that currently are completely missing. It needs to inspire both householders and practitioners so that they can enable locally led delivery. And there are a number of these hubs, as Brian's alluded to, Manchester, West Yorkshire, etc. That really happening. And we don't. This national agency shouldn't be something that takes that over, but it needs to do things that they can't do on their own. And I'll allude to what those are shortly. The modelling we did for the National Retrofit Strategy was on the basis that we felt that the CO2 savings need to be achieved by 2040, not 2050, as has been highlighted now by the IPCC report that came out last month. The month before. And the key components are set out here. The leadership and communications element there was important. I think the example we cited, which appears to be a bit Marmite once we consulted on this, is about the Olympics Delivery Authority and how it inspired. It got a whole number of volunteers out there to do the promotion of this, and it got lots of people on side to try and make this actually happen. Critically as well, supported transition mechanism. In other words, that a number of SMEs can be encouraged to get into this and not be completely caned by a contract that they've signed up to because they haven't performed. Sort of safe space to allow them to use innovative products, new techniques, rather than being frightened of doing so, because we do have an industry that really doesn't allow that stuff to happen. Performance standards, energy, water, air quality, all set out in a way that means that we can actually aim for something really useful. And in other words, we make promises to homeowners and we show that we've actually achieved that at the end of it. testing the building at the end, showing the householder that they've actually got something that they paid for, so that they then go off and tell other people that it's worth doing. Building a real movement here rather than just a sort of, if you like, a model that hopefully people can dip into. Finance and grants and the Green Finance Institute are working extremely hard on financial mechanisms here that can come into this place. And believe me, there are billions ready to be lent into the home improvement sector if we get our models right. Training and accreditation, Emma's dwelt on that already. I shan't do any more. Materials and equipment. This is really trying to say that back at the start of the year, we need to bring the manufacturers and suppliers into this so that they can understand what we believe they need to supply over the next 20 years. And they can then in turn tell us where they think their challenges are. And actually, well, we're having great dialogue already because we've got a lot of challenges on our plate right now, haven't we, in this particular place. So I think it just underlines the need for that. Creating customer demand is sort of almost like a directorate or a particular action. Actually, I don't think we have a problem there. I know it's seen as a barrier by many. I think we've just been making terrible offers to lots of people, and they don't want to buy what we're offering. If we get our act together, we get a competent workforce, we get financial stimulus, we get some other things that stop people from doing bad things, whether it's compliance and quality, or whether it's building regulations that actually have some teeth, then I think we'll actually get some customer demand, no problem. And we've already demonstrated this. As I'll show you later on, we have some able to pay schemes that have been trialled right now in the UK, which are now themselves moving into profit because customers want to buy what we're offering. Here is the pace that Brian outlined. So going relatively slow for a few years to try and actually build up the infrastructure to enable us to drive at pace from 2026 onwards to 2035, and then very deliberately ramping down the pace at the end because we want the people that we've trained to go into other sectors. We want to train them so that they've got transferable skills rather than just training them up and dropping them when we don't need them anymore. That's not a good message. That's not inspirational. It won't bring people in. And just to demonstrate graphically the sort of numbers of trades that we believe that need to be brought into the industry, you'll see, if you can see my cursor, around about 2008 here, this was when we had our recession. The industry's never really recovered in terms of its numbers. I'd like to see recent stats on how many people have left because of Brexit. But actually, irrespective of that, we've still got a massive mountain to climb in terms of the amount of people we need to hit that S-curve profile. And I would say the longer it takes us to get that S-curve and get our pace up, the more we will need to try and hit a climate change sort of cliff edge in order to try and hit our targets by that particular stage. And just to give you some numbers here, the costs of the entire programme, we believe the programme is a £523 billion programme. The CCC say it's 250 billion. Our view is they're not being particularly ambitious with what they're throwing at our houses. Their belief is that kits can do a lot more than that we believe it can. We think there's a lot of insulation that needs to go in, much more than they think, because the grid won't cope with the amount of heat pumps that are going to be thrown at it. And hopefully, given this week's announcements from Boris Johnson that the grid will completely decarbonise by 2035, maybe we'll be right, and maybe the CCC number is more to it. But if we plan for that and then we get to 2035 and actually, we need to find another 250 billion, I don't feel that is pretty good, very good leadership. But look at it in terms of a business plan for government. Look at the final number here. We're actually only asking government to invest 167 billion, and private capital will come in to the order of 356 billion. So there are some things that government can do, and only government can do, to unlock this market. But actually, we think it's actually going to unlock a hell of a lot of money and lots of income for them as well. So over the period to 2040, we believe the income coming into government is 387 billion. That is a good business plan. I was very lucky to be invited onto the Green Jobs Task Force, which looks at all sectors of government of influence in terms of how to create green jobs. And I just want to highlight very quickly the number one recommendation that came out of this piece of work. The government should publish a detailed net zero strategy. If we don't have that leadership, we don't have the clarity, nothing else flows from it. We need that, and we need it fast. So very quickly, what are we doing at Parity to just show, to hopefully give a bit of optimism to how things are actually moving in this place? Our view is that we need to understand buildings very intimately and very quickly, much and earlier potentially than householders are getting involved. So What we do, we've done it now for Greater Manchester, all of London, and for the 3 areas of our able to pay retrofit programs. We've modelled every individual address. Every house in Greater Manchester and London, for instance, has a whole house plan already digitally. So it enables us to do smart marketing, as the title says there, enables us to say to householders before they've even met us, we believe we know what you need to do to get to net zero, what it will cost, and potentially different routes to get there. But critically as well, a householder here can log on to their house. And I'll show you an example of how we do that. This is our Warmer Sussex programme. Householder can log on, they can see the details of the house we've already got. They can log on, they can change those, the model can recalculate, and then you can start to add measures into that building and see on the right here what the costs are, so that your packages, your basket of measures is going up in cost, your energy bills are going down, your carbon's going down. You can start to see what it means for you. And on that basis, they approach us as a scheme, and we would go to the property. Our retrofit coordinators will do an assessment of the property, will show them where their carbon lies, where the money is, where the investment proposition is, and in phases how to get down to net zero, including at the end there, when they can't get any further with the kit, how many trees to plant to get them to net zero itself. And critically, you know, we're using prices in there based on our experience of installing right now in those areas. So it's really all about trying to make sure, not just as Emma said, us as an industry understanding how individual houses work as a system, it's how we as an industry understand how the journey needs to flow from no knowledge to some knowledge to completed retrofit, and then learning with some performance monitoring at the end exactly how we improve that entire system. We don't think like that as an industry, and we really need to get to that particular point. And building in the grants that may or may not be coming, the finance providers that are willing to lend but currently don't see a way in. But I want to leave you on the last slide here. This is not just about trying to generate customers. We've talked, of course, about training, but it's not just about training on its own. My view is that there's plenty of companies out there that are very responsible, want to do the right thing, and they do not want to grow. They just want to survive. They don't want to take many people on. We have a challenge here to create new companies as well, not just chuck a whole load of people through colleges and hopefully they come out the other end and there's vacancies. We need to be incubating new companies right now. We need to create an industry from scratch to get this done. Yeah, this is a massive undertaking. My final recommendation really is we need this national leadership, the general awareness campaign that would inspire practitioners and customers to try and get in on this as soon as they can, to try and build that market is critical. But unless we have a dedicated central place, whether it's a collaborative model or whether it's a new agency to set up, I do not believe it can happen without that. Thanks very much.
Great, well, thank you very much indeed, Russell. So that now ends the formal presentation. So I'm going to sort of move on to some questions, and really I'm going to ask the first one to Russell actually, because I think this touches on what everyone said in their presentation, is really the market demand to get the industry to invest in the skills and training that are needed to deliver retrofit. It's market demand. Now, we saw over the summer how I think there were some leaks from government suggesting that they were going to be banning gas boilers for all homes, and that would have to install very expensive heat pumps, which cost more to run than your gas boiler. And there's a bit of a backlash, frankly, from some of the press. And I suspect that might be one of the reasons why the heat and building strategy is being delayed, because you can see how politically toxic this is. If you sort of start saying to people, you know, you're going to have to pay out more money, the payback is probably never, and there's an election coming, who are you going to vote for? So how on earth do you get around that dilemma? How do we get people to actually embrace retrofit?
Okay, well, it is back to the offer. You know, a heat pump is only one part of the whole house system, and there are many facets at play here. If you do look at some measures in isolation, particularly, I mean, I'll give another example that I used 15 years ago when I started this, is windows. I mean, people love putting new windows in their house, right? But if you replace a single glazed window with a double glazed window, it's a 100-year payback. But people buy windows because they want windows, and the industry has done a good job at selling windows. So we've just got to get our act together and sell this right and show people the real benefits of doing this stuff. You know, a heat pump has virtually no maintenance. It will last for over 20 years. You're buying something that will pay for itself in its lifetime without question. Now a boiler will pay for itself in its lifetime, and that's in about 6 years. You're just buying a different piece of kit over a different horizon. It is a dilemma, and the headlines are being stirred up by people that are about to die as an industry, and that's the gas fossil fuel industry, right? They are going to disappear because they're now irrelevant. They're trying to conjure up this aspect of hydrogen as being a saviour. It's dangerous. You can't pipe it to houses, and it's a technology that's not proven. It might work in heavy industry and in a few buses. Great, let's do that, but don't pretend this is something that can heat houses. It's impossible. So it really, if you look at the whole house, we get industry to appreciate every aspect of a house that needs to be dealt with at once over a period of time. You know, phase planning is good as long as you're not blocking the next phase with your piece of work, which as an industry we cannot cope with right now, which is why we need Emma's a recommendation for systems thinking for our industry. If we solve all that, Thomas, we've got it cracked. I tell you now, it's just a philosophy. It's a change of thinking. We need to think long term. And one little fact I wanted to give you: the value of our housing stock in the UK between 2019 and 2020 went up by 380 billion. That's more than the CCC's projected cost of the entire retrofit program in the UK. So the money's there. These are big, eye-watering numbers, but the money's there. We just have to look at this in a slightly different lens. And you know, the newspapers are saying one thing, but who's paying those newspapers to say it? It's the fossil fuel guys. So you know, let's get our angle right here.
Great. Well, thanks, Russell. And Brian, I mean, do you have any sort of thoughts on the, you know, the challenges of getting people to invest in retrofit?
Yeah, well, it is a big challenge, and I think one of the key things is actually to have that better communication, the government actually taking more of the lead about actually this is a priority for the government, not just this government, but future government. So we're hearing a lot about cutting carbon emissions, but less so on the actual delivery. So that's why the heat and building strategy, I think, is so important. It's a key milestone, and the COP would be a great opportunity for the government to actually say what it's doing to tackle climate change. I think a lot of people are interested in how they can improve their homes. If they a lot of people want to do their bit. Many people don't fully understand really how their homes operate and perform, and looking for good advice about actually what they can do on a practical level, which is why I think it's very important to each home to have its own passport, so that over time people can assess what they can have done to their homes and at what cost. It's a, you know, we were talking earlier about this is a huge engineering or infrastructure project. We've got to tell and explain the story and then do it in bite-sized chunks, otherwise it's too overwhelming. But the first bit is having that real commitment, that leadership from the government saying, look, this is what we're going to do to build a greener Britain. This is what we're going to, each of you can do in terms of your homes. And we know that local authorities, many local authorities are tackling social housing, which is where we may see faster progress. The Welsh Government are taking a lead on this. Local authorities such as Manchester are doing some great work. And in terms of government support, it could be that a third of people need direct government help, 1/3 probably need a mixture of some help, and a third of us can probably afford to do it on our own. So it's got to happen at some point. So really the government should start explaining and telling the story, and it starts, I think, now with the heat and building strategy.
Thank you. So I missed some of that. I think my internet connection went down. I've turned off my camera actually. I can sort of hear you all again now. I mean, before we move on to the skills question, I just want to ask one more sort of thing there. We've seen a huge increase in gas prices recently, and there's talk, I think this morning, of massive increases next year. Is this not an opportunity? You know, in the sense that, you know, one of the problems has been that gas is so cheap, and now it's actually going up in price. It really alters the kind of economics of moving over to, well, an incentive to insulate and improve the efficiency of your home to get your bills down, but also, of course, you know, moving away from gas.
Well, it's certainly a key driver. I mean, when we say gas is cheap, we've still got 2.5 million households who are living in fuel poverty. So for many people, it is a big challenge. But you're right about prices have historically been much cheaper in recent years. With the huge escalation in gas prices and terrifying increases from people on average incomes, it's going to be very challenging. So this will actually encourage people, I think, if they can, to actually upgrade. But for many on low incomes, they'll probably be living in the private renter sector or social housing. So we've got to be mindful of that. But I do feel this is the first important step is actually for the government to set out a long-term plan. And because without that, it looks very piecemeal and people don't know the forward direction. So that's absolutely critical and also important in terms of building up confidence in the building industry for companies to start up or adapt and change and see the market opportunity.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to skills now. I mean, the extra people needed to do all this work is incredible. Where are they all going to come? Has anyone got any idea where they're all going to come from?
I mean, I can start on that if you like.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. We've recognised in our research, that the real scale of the challenge, particularly considering that we already have a large sort of recruitment requirement over the next 5 years, according to our Construction Skills Network forecast, and that's without all of this additional work and a programme of retrofit. So I think it's really kind of brings to the fore the sort of systemic issues that the industry has in terms of recruitment. So it's really important that we start to address and work together, I think, particularly to address those sort of historic issues of the images of the sector, to highlight the potential career paths that people can have and how they can get into the industry. I think we also need to encourage employers in the industry to sort of widen their net when they're and the ways that they recruit and the pools that they look to recruit at. We may also need to look at programs to kind of convert people from other trades or from full-time education and that kind of thing. Also looking at picking up on those sort of underrepresented groups, so sort of fairness, inclusion and respect to help with that recruitment as well. So I think really it is a big challenge for the industry, but I think if we collaborate and assist both people, the general public and the careers guidance professionals to have a better understanding of the industry and the opportunities that it presents. I think also there's an opportunity here to sort of to focus on that sort of sustainability aspect and the sort of green aspirations that a lot of younger people particularly have at the moment. And I think the last year or so has really brought to the fore people's concerns around climate change. So I think that's, that could be a potential sort of angle for this is a way that people can make a difference and they can have a successful career and do that at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Something I can add, if I may, Thomas. I do think we have enough people to do this. They've got to want to do it. I think that's one of Emma's key points. We've got to not dress this up in anything other than it's a fantastic industry to work in, and there's a lot of money to be made, and you're making a difference to people's lives. We don't tell that story often enough. It's a very simple one, and you can be your own boss and all that stuff. It's a great place to work. One thing I would say though is what Emma and I have both quoted big eye-watering numbers of people that we think we need to get into the industry. If there is enough confidence in this sector being something that is going to be well enough supported and it's a long-term proposition, we'll start getting some innovation into the sector that will mean that we'll need less people than based on our calculations. There's a big thrust for off-site construction in the new build sector. There's plenty of initiatives that are trying it out in retrofit. But our surveying techniques are from the dark ages. We can be optimizing the way we survey buildings so that information can go to the key people immediately. Why shouldn't we get to a point where we're aspiring to get a van driving down the road 2 hours after you've done the survey with all the right kit in it immediately, and you've already booked a place for the householder to move into for 2 weeks because they need to get out of the house while you're doing some massive construction, and some of it's done by robots. We're just not even in that zone yet, but very few people are, and they're being quite well supported. But as an industry, we're miles away from it. We can get there. I genuinely think there are enormous efficiencies and productivity improvements that can be brought into construction, but we don't have that confidence just yet. So on the one hand, you might say to somebody, especially some politicians that don't know the sector very well, it's just impossible, isn't it? We're not going to get 400,000 people. But actually, when you start lifting up the bonnet and you're looking at all the different factors that make this work, I think we really can make it happen. We just haven't even taken the first step, because it's such a big problem and everyone's kind of staring at each other from all their different silos, thinking, well, we'll wait for somebody else to start. But we need that leadership from the centre to help everyone move together.
Okay, and I mean, Brian, are you confident that your members will be able to recruit the the numbers of people needed to do this work?
Well, there was a skills crisis before the pandemic, and we're seeing shortages in all the trades at the moment. So it is a concern to us about finding enough tradespeople, because we are competing with other sectors as well. So it does raise questions about whether or not we need to allow more people into the country. But we need to improve our apprenticeships and actually grow homegrown talent. But it takes 2 to 3 years to train people up. So this is why I think if there is going to be a growing retrofit market, the government should say so, and we can start planning and preparing for the creation of these extra jobs that are going to be needed. And I know the CITB published a report this year saying an extra 200,000 people would be needed in our sector. So obviously there's a huge challenge, but massive opportunities as well. A lot of my members could easily adapt in terms of upskilling to actually do a lot of the work that is required. So that's a great opportunity for them, but they need that certainty rather than what we've seen to date.
Sure. And I mean, sort of relating to the whole point about sort of attracting numbers of people into the profession, but also really maybe tackling the sort of consumer concerns around sort of so-called cowboy builders. I mean, do you think that the people that are sort of training up to undertake this work, there should be sort of professional qualifications? I think other countries do this, where you become a sort of a fully qualified sort of retrofit sort of installer. It might be specific to a certain type of product or service. Do you think that would help sort of give consumer confidence, but also maybe feel that people who are coming into the industry that this is a kind of recognized qualification that is going to be useful for them?
Yeah, well, the work that it needs to be carried out needs to be done to a certain standard, and the PAS 2030 and PAS 2035 sets the benchmark there. So installers would need to actually make sure they have that requirement. But linked to that, of course, for a long time we've been raising concerns at the fact that anyone can call themselves a builder and then carry out work. So we would like to see licensing of construction companies to make sure that actually they're bona fide and protect consumers.
I'll just add to that from what Brian said, that was one of the sort of key recommendations from our Building Skills for Net Zero research as well. That was one of the sort of key things. People felt that there was a need for some form of regulation or certification to maintain that sort of quality aspect. And interestingly, that's borne out with the interviews that I've done recently with SMEs. They were calling, maybe surprisingly, for some form of accreditation or certification to prevent that sort of cowboy aspect. And I think they're all very passionate about sort of protecting their reputation, but also the reputation of the sector as well. They're very keen to sort of emphasise that quality aspect and that quality assurance aspect. So I think there is quite a strong call from industry. I think that there is for some form of accreditation or certification to try and prevent those sorts of things happening.
Yeah, Emma, just on the back of that, we did a survey of our members. 77% said they would like to see some form of licensing or registration.
Right, that's impressive. Yeah, and I mean, Russell, the people that you use, I mean, are you using sort of people that have kind of got recognised qualifications or members of an organisation like the FMB?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, what we did to try and add some structure, we set up a not-for-profit cooperative called Retrofit Works about 10 years ago now. God, 10 years. And frankly, we have to rely on the existing accreditation schemes, competent person schemes, in order to support how we set our model up. And we use local firms, small companies that have their own rate labour. As soon as you move away from that, where they might be subcontracting and subcontracting, you definitely lose control. So we know what we're about. We know how to make good work, but you have to be careful and not stretch your model too far, because that's when the problems with quality start to creep in. but it's all possible. Everything we're doing, say the Oxfordshire model now, where we're working very close collaboration with community groups, as I say, it's now in profit. We've got able to pay customers coming forward, doing their own homes up. We're using contractors in the local area to do it. We can do this stuff.
Great. Well, on that note, a positive note, we're actually out of time. That's the hour up. So I'd just like to say thanks very much to Russell, Brian, and Emma for their contribution in a really interesting discussion. And this is one that's going to run and run and run. You know, we're at the very beginning of the journey. So you know, hopefully we'll all sort of meet again for another session. But and for anybody who wants to download this webinar, it should be available on demand later on. And thanks to everybody for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.